In this video, I'm going to be showing you everything I know about thinning paints and paint consistency, so no matter your skill level, you'll be able to get your miniatures fully painted. I'll be showing you the difference thinning your paint can make to the look of our miniatures, and what happens if we don't thin our paints enough or thin them too much. And to make things easier, this is going to be an easy to follow guide, talking about all the ideas and techniques, so by the end you'll have the confidence and knowledge when it comes to thinning your own paints for painting your own miniatures. Welcome to TableTopReady, my name's Michael, and I want to answer all those questions you could possibly have about paint consistency and thinning your paints, so that you have a better understanding of how and why it's done. All of the paints and brushes I use throughout this tutorial will be listed in the description, along with any hobby equipment I think you'll find useful, with affiliate links to where you can buy them. And using those links really helps support the channel and creating these videos. And before we get started, I want to say a massive thank you to all the amazing people who've made this tutorial possible with their continued support. It really means a lot. It allows me to get all the paints, brushes and miniatures I need to make these tutorials, so I can continue to help you getting better at painting. As well, if you enjoy my content here on TableTopReady, then let me know by clicking that like button, and why not leave me a comment. I love reading them and hearing about your own hobby. I am using Space Marines as an example for this video, but know that what I'm showing you is the same for everything you paint. I'm also using a white undercoat so you can better see what's happening, but again this will be the same for any colour of undercoat you use. When first starting to paint miniatures, the first thing we learn is to thin our paint, but why is that? If we paint our miniatures without thinning our paint, you'll see how thick it is and how quickly we lose details in our miniatures once it's dried. It's also uneven and blobby. This is because the paint doesn't flow, and once deposited will stay how you left it. So once it's dried it maintains this blobby shape. But if we add water it improves the flow off the paint, and you can now see how it levels out. This is important to know because this means the pigment or colour in the paint will be distributed more evenly, giving us a smoother finish. When we add water to improve the flow, we also make the paint more transparent as we thin out the pigment. What is paint? Paint is made up of a pigment, which is the colour, and is suspended in a medium or liquid, and when that liquid evaporates, all that is left is the pigment or colour in the paint. This is what is happening when we paint a layer on our miniatures. So if we thin the paint even more, then the paint will flow so much where we can't control it, and we lose more strength in the colour. It's really important to understand what's happening and why we do the things that we're doing, because it allows us to better think about the things that we're doing. It also gives us more control, which means we're improving our skills as a miniature painter. Now we know what happens when we thin our paint, we want to find the right balance of flow and transparency. So if the paint is too thick and the water too thin, then we can say that somewhere in the middle is going to do the trick. So I always like to thin my paint with an equal amount of water. This is enough so we have control over where it goes, and it's thin enough so we don't lose details once it's dried. But as I said earlier, when we thin down the paint it also becomes more transparent, but what we really want is a nice solid colour. All we need to do though is wait until our first layer is dried, then paint another layer on top. This is different to painting one thick layer, as the pigment is more evenly distributed and evenly spread. Obviously the thinner the paint the more layers we will need before we get a solid colour. But if we stick to that equal amount of water, then you should get a nice solid colour with 2 or 3 layers of paint. I now want to talk about how to thin our paints and what can affect our paint differently depending on what we're doing with it. For me, the best way to thin your paints is with water. It's readily available and the easiest to use, so maybe don't listen to people when they tell you to use something different. Let's look at something people may suggest: Flow Improver. Flow Improver can be added to paint to increase the time it takes to dry, giving it more time to flow, hence the name. But for a hobby where we're already waiting for our paint to dry, we don't need to wait any longer. Something else we could use is a medium. This is pretty much paint without the colour. Although this absolutely works to thin your paint, it costs money, but water does exactly the same thing. The only time a medium becomes really useful is when we're working with really thin paint, as the pigment starts to behave differently. Something else to think about is what kind of palette we're using, as this can affect our paint as well. As we know, water evaporates, which means if we use a dry palette whilst we're painting, the paint on the palette is actually getting thicker. This means we have to constantly add water and we actually end up using more paint over time. Something that can help with this is a wet palette, which keeps our paint moist. Just remember, we still need to thin our paints as normal, even if using a wet palette. Just make sure there's no water sitting on the parchment for better control. Even though I'm giving you all of this information, you still need to put it into practice and get your head around it before you fully understand how everything's working. And you may not even get it right the first time you do something, but that's okay. You should now have a better understanding of why and how we thin our paints, but how can we use this? I've already said that using the same amount of water as you have paint usually does the trick, but there are going to be times when we want a different amount of water. There are times when we may want a strong colour, like edge highlighting for example. If the paint was as transparent for painting lines, we would have to do multiple passes to get a strong line, which takes longer. So maybe for highlighting we use a little less water. A technique where we wouldn't add any water is for dry brushing. This is because we don't want the paint to flow so easily off of our brush, so it's only deposited on edges and raised detail. Finally, when glazing, I like to add twice the amount of water because we want our paint to be more transparent, letting us create effects, add different tones of colour, and lets us paint smoother transitions between colours. But because most of the time we're just building up layers of paint, then an equal amount of water is a good place to start. Understand what I'm telling you is what I like to do, and what I think is best practice to achieving great looking miniatures no matter your skill level, even as a beginner. And obviously there are a lot of different ways to achieving the same results, it's just finding out what works best for you. So try lots of different things. Let's finish up this video talking about how using the right consistency of paint can give us better results and actually make painting miniatures a lot easier. So here I'm painting without thinning my paint, and I'm having a really bad time because I'm having to spend more time with the paint trying to spread it around. When it comes to details, I've got no control how the paint flows off the brush and where it goes because there's too much of it. And we can forget about trying to be neat and tidy as getting in between armour and even trying to paint lenses becomes more difficult. Painting with overly thin paints can also create a challenge. First of all, we have to use more layers to build up to a solid colour to start with, and the paint may even flow to places we don't want it to when it comes to painting raised details. As well, because the paint is so thin, it takes longer to dry, which means overall it's going to take longer to get our miniatures painted, and we end up with a very weak colour as well. If we thin our paints to a consistency which gives us a nice flow, but still able to have good coverage, then painting becomes much more enjoyable as the paint behaves itself, and although we have to paint a couple of layers to build up to a solid colour, we're able to keep our details nice and crisp. I wanted to make this video because it has to be the number one question I get asked all the time, so hopefully after watching this video, you'll have a better understanding of thinning your paints and how we approach it. The last thing to do in this video is to thank some wonderful people who have recently become supporters or has donated to the channel. Gibby Tyler, Ray and Maxine B. And if you enjoy the content here on TableTopReady and want to help support the channel as well, you can become a channel member or join my Patreon, which gives you access to our Discord, regular updates, and you'll get to watch videos and tutorials early. We've now finished looking at how to thin our paints, and I hope I've been able to give you the confidence and knowledge to get your miniatures fully painted. I've got plenty of other tutorials on the channel, including how to get better at highlighting and even how to get miniatures ready for painting, so make sure to go and check those out as well. I really do enjoy making these tutorials and I hope you find them useful. If you do, then please leave a like and let me know in the comments below. As well, make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future content, and I'll see you in the next video.